All right, Business 226. We are on Chapter 6, Week 3, Chapter 6. We just learned about present value, future value of money. Now we're going to apply that to business with the cost of money and interest rate levels, determinants of interest rates, the term structure and yield curves, using yield curves to estimate future interest rates. So what all does that mean? What are the four factors that affect the level of interest rates? Production opportunities, time preference for consumption, risk, and expected inflation. Let's dig into that a little bit. Nominal versus real rates. R equals nominal rate. R star represents the real risk-free rate of interest, like a T-bill, um, if there is no inflation. So like a T-bill will be between usually 1 to 4%. So if there's no inflation, you could expect at the safest investment rate to earn 1 to 4%. And then R lower RF represents the rate of interest on treasury securities. So determinants of interest rates. R star plus IP plus DRP plus LP plus MRP. Okay, R is the required rate of return on a debt security. R star is the real risk-free rate of interest. IP is the inflation premium. So a dollar today is not the same as a dollar in a year. It'll be worth less in a year than it is today. Default risk premium. How much do you need to pay because of the chance of you going default, not paying it back? Liquidity premium. Maturity risk premium. How likely are you going to make it to the end? So premiums added to R star for different types of debt. Here are the different things. Yield curve and the term structure of interest rates. Term structure, relationship between interest rates for yields and maturity. So the longer you go out, you would expect more money because the risk goes up. This is a graph that kind of shows you what that looks like. Constructing the yield curve, inflation. Step 1, find the average expected inflation rate over years 1 to n. That is a fancy, complicated looking formula. It's not that hard actually. Assume inflation expected to be 5% next year, 6% the following year, and 8% thereafter. So IP, inflation projected, 5% divided by 1 equals 5%. IP 10 equals 5 plus 6 plus 8 times 8 divided by 10. It gets you that 7.5. IP 20, 5 plus 6 plus 8, 18 divided by 20, 7.75. See this 10, this 8% times 8, that's 8% at 8 years. 8% at 18 years. So we have 1 year, 2 year, 10 years. 1 year, 2 year, 20 years. That means you have to earn this inflation protection to break even versus inflation. So that means that you would earn $0. So your dollar today would be the same dollar next year or 20 years from now. Now, in 20 years, it won't be a dollar. It'll be a different amount, but it'll be equivalent to a dollar today. Maturity risk. Find the appropriate maturity risk premium. For this example, the following equation will be used to find a security's appropriate maturity risk. So maturity risk, 0.1 times t minus 1. So maturity risk premium, 0.1, 1 minus 1 is 0. 0.1 times 10 minus 1 is 0.9. So as we go up in years, you can see the maturity risk premium goes up. Adding the premiums to R star. So assume R star is 3%. So 3% plus 5% plus 0 is 8%. So for 1 year, we would expect 8%. 10 years, we would expect 11.4. And then 20 years, we expect 12.65. So you can see as time goes up, we are expecting to earn more money on our money. Hypothetical yield curve, you can see it's going up. The insurance premium, the inflation premium takes up the bulk of it. The risk-free rate takes up this much. And the maturity risk is a small portion. Relationship between treasury yield curve and yield curves for corporate issues. Corporate yield curves are higher than that of treasury securities, though not necessarily parallel to the treasury curve, because treasury securities are the least risky, whereas corporate yields are more risky. The spread between corporate and treasury yield curves widen as the corporate bond rating decreases. So that's kind of like your FICO score. The worse a company is, the more risk there is, and it's going to cost more to borrow money, especially at those longer rates. Who's going to loan you 30-year rates if you might not be here in 2 or 3 years based on how risky you are? Since corporate yields include a default risk premium and a liquidity premium, the corporate bond yield spread can be calculated as follows. It's the corporate bond yield spread, corporate bond yield minus the treasury bond yield, DRP plus LP. So here you can see treasuries, a AA rated bond, and a triple B rated bond. You can see the triple B is the worst rated and it's the highest one. Remember, treasury is low risk. These are a little bit higher risk, and that's a little bit higher risk. Pure expectations theory. The pure expectations theory contends that the shape of the yield curve depends on investors' expectations about future interest rates. Do we think rates are going to go up or down? If interest rates are expected to increase, long-term rates will be higher than short-term rates, and vice versa. Thus, the yield curve can slope up or down for long-term rates. That doesn't mean that the total rate will be higher or lower depending on what we think the yield curve is going to do. It can be lower in the future if we have high current interest rates. Assumptions of pure expectations assumes that the maturity risk premium for Treasury securities is zero. The United States government is not going to default on their securities. That means it has no maturity risk. Long-term rates are an average of current and future short-term rates. If the pure expectations theory is correct, you can use the yield curve to back out expected future interest rates. An example. So, if the pure expectation theory holds, what does the market expect will be the interest rate on 1-year securities 1 year from now, 3-year securities 2 years from now? The pure expectations theory says that 1-year securities will yield 6.4004 1 year from now. Notice, if you use an average, the answer is still very close, 6.2, and the result will be 6.4. The pure expectations theory says that the 3-year security will yield 6.75, and this is just figuring out the time value of that interest rate. Some would argue that the market risk premium is not equal to zero, and hence the pure expectation theory is incorrect. Most evidence suggests the general view that lenders prefer short-term securities and view long-term securities as riskier. Thus, investors demand a premium to persuade them to hold long-term securities versus short-term securities. That's why the market risk premium is usually above zero. So some macroeconomics that influence interest rates. The Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve sets the borrowing rate. As that goes up or down, it affects all interest rates. If the federal budget has a deficit or a surplus, international factors, and the level of business activity. If business activity is really booming and we're worried about inflation, the Federal Reserve will increase rates to try to push down activity. On the other hand, if we're in a recession, the Federal Reserve will lower interest rates to try to incentivize businesses to borrow money and expand. Because remember, we're going to learn about this more later, but these are the interest rates that investors would expect to get over these timelines, 1 year, 10 year, 20 year. So if a business wanted to borrow money for 1 year at 8%, they would need to expect to make at least 8% on that money within their business. We'll talk about that more later in later chapters. But if you borrow the money at 8% as a business, you have to make more than 8%. Otherwise, you are losing. Why would you borrow the money to put it into your business if you're losing money on it? Same thing with the investors. They want to make sure that the dollar they give you today is worth at least $1, if not more, next year. That's why we have the inflation in here to ensure that we make more money. And as we go further out, we have our market risk premium. What's going to happen in the future that we don't know about to try to earn more money? If you think interest rates are going to go up a whole lot in the future over 20 years. Maybe 12.65 is smart to borrow it now because you know your business will be making 15 to 20%, and you know that the 1 year rate in a few years will be higher than this 12.65. All right, that's a lot of interesting stuff. We're going to keep learning on this stuff in the future. That is chapter 6, week 3. Good luck on the homework. We have a midterm that will be after next week's stuff. Talk to you guys later. Have a good one.